All right, hello. All these videos of me just drinking at the start of them. Welcome. It is Sylph Dominic Hawkins here, Reigning Spirit Dojo, coming to you live Friday night, Friday the 19th of June 2020. So this marks session, Hoshinden Philosophy and Theory session number 13 that I started doing primarily during the 2020 coronavirus first wave fun, and if you're watching this in a year from now, yeah, that's right. It's been great fun. I've really enjoyed these sessions. This is the last session in this group of talks because next week we start back in class. Whoa! The Victorian government has allowed indoor fitness centres, martial arts, yoga, gyms, those kinds of places, of which obviously we fall into that category, to reopen on June the 22nd, which is next Monday. So our first class, actual wear a gi, come to class, bring a drink bottle, have some fun, back to 1.5 hour classes, is next Wednesday the 24th of June. And once we hit the ground running, moving forward, the timetable as of next week will be Wednesday and Friday only. I will be the only teacher at all the classes. And Wednesday we'll have a 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock Bujinkan class run by myself. Then an 8 o'clock to 9:30 Hoshinden adults general class. Friday, we'll have a 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock young teens class, ages 8 to 12, run by me. And then a 7 to 8 o'clock black belt class, run by me. And then an 8 to 9:30 Hoshinden adults general class, run by me. We no longer will provide any 5, 6, 7-year-old kids classes for the foreseeable future. And all teenagers aged 13 and over will be amalgamated and allowed to train with the adults classes. So adult sessions on Wednesday and Friday nights will now incorporate everyone over the age of 13. And that will start there. And then we will see what happens. So be in touch if you have questions, if you're excited, add notes onto the Facebook group. Feel free to send an email to the dojo if you have specific questions. I apologise in advance if that timetable and that format doesn't work for some of you, but that's just the way that it has to be. Feel free to send me hate mail to hatemail@reigningspiritdojo, which I never check. It will join the other 10,000 I never look at. I'm not saying that that's the way that it will be forever, but that's the way we're going to start. And it will most certainly be that way for the first couple months. And then we'll dialogue, we'll see what happens and where we might want to go from there. But that's what we're going to start back with as of next week. Because the Wednesday and Friday night sessions, which have been the meditation and philosophy and theory sessions, will be replaced, those exact time slots will be replaced with the actual classes. I won't be filming sessions like this. I'll be too busy not throwing people around. I'll be too busy pretending to throw people around. And instead we'll be doing a lot of fitness, a lot of alchemy, a lot of kata, lots of weaponry kata, and there'll be class talks, but they won't be filmed. So I hope that if you're someone who's joined us through all 13, this is session number 13, if you've joined us through all 13 of these Friday night videos, 10 points to you. I hope you've kept your stamp card and you've collected all the figures along the way. You can trade them in at your nearest boost juice. I don't have any affiliation with Richard. That's right. I've had a great time, and hopefully these sessions have helped to solidify some of your questions, especially those of you in the colour belt grades who haven't had the opportunity to have much one-on-one time with me over the decade. Or if you're new, or if you're watching this in the future, and it's 100 years from now, and you can't find me anymore in the physical to ask these questions. Hopefully these videos will be useful. They'll add into the public works for Hoshinden, and I have painted a picture of my thoughts and intentions along with the work, and also hopefully filled in some of the glaring questions of like, but why 12, you know? I think that was like video number 3 or 4. So go back and I think I even called that why 12. So moving on tonight, very quickly, in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to wrap up the theory and philosophy generalized topic for these sections. There's obviously, I could talk for the next million years about these things, but these particular, I had a whole list of topics to talk about over these sessions for the coronavirus, you know, isolation time, and I've pretty much finished that. So I'll wrap that up. It's all the things I wanted to cover, all the topics I wanted to cover for filling in the gaps for colour belt grades and just touching into some of the black belt study and levels of thought and understanding. So after that, and my iPad battery is low due to a fascinating, you know, run around today. We'll see how far into this video you'll actually get. But those of us in the audience here will keep talking until 9, so good luck. I reckon you'll probably get half an hour out of this battery. I'm sure it'll alert me. Notice how I spent 3 minutes wasting battery talking about that. To the rest of tonight, after I finish just chit-chatting and rounding off the topics, tonight's a Q&A. So I invited, if you were watching the videos over the last 2 or 3 weeks, in each of those I've been inviting you to this session so that you could come and take part as an audience and ask me questions. So we'll have a dialogue and I'll answer to the audience that are here. If you're at home and you have a specific question and it comes up and there's still iPad battery and I can actually, you know, read those questions, write something in the comments because I'll be happy to answer any of the questions in Q&A style through your written comments as well. But let's just round off and finish up this 13-week run of Hoshinden theory and philosophy. So the idea for this has been to answer some of the questions that I often get asked in class on a repeated basis. So everyone who starts, no one ever has questions. A lot of people have questions on the first day. No one ever has questions for the next 12 months. And then people slowly have 1 or 2 questions, you know, like a year after that. And they're really well thought out questions, you know. They wait. And then all of a sudden a year later, someone just says to me, how did you line up the colours to the qualities? And you're like, that's a really good question. I've obviously thought about that for quite a long time, haven't been able to find the answer and then pose it as a question. Yes, and the audience are like, oh my God, I never thought of it. And then I'll dialogue that. Another year will go by, and then they'll come up with another question that's equally profound. and so I wanted to just be able to put this series together to answer some of those and provide some of my feedback directly in my thoughts. And hopefully I'm still hoping that I'll get asked questions. It'd be a shame if no one asked questions for the first 6 years because the YouTube series answered them all. But I highly doubt that, knowing me and my way of talking. So the level of dialogue that I've provided in these videos has been aimed at students from direct starting point, right up to about 6 or 7 years of training. Answering questions and presenting topics that I feel like are directly intrinsic to those years of study. Some of the self-questions that come up, you know, the study is designed in such a way so that you're studying physical applications and techniques at points that they do bring up very specific questions for you. You know, there's a reason why the techniques in the white and red section, right and red belt section, are a certain way. And there's a certain theme and a certain flavour to all of them across the 12 phases. And they're designed to evoke specific emotions and specific ideas and specific concepts about you, yourself, your response, your relationship to martial arts, your relationship to force and physical power, and then that's meant to lead you into some philosophical questions. And then the next layer, the orange and yellow belt techniques, again, they're designed to evoke very specific emotions from you. And then in those emotions, they're designed to evoke questions and some of your own, you know, the wave of your own self-megalomania that we all run through in martial arts will be under observation. and you know, it's a good idea for every block that you stack up in your building that you carve a block down into the ground and into the earth, remind yourself that as the branches of the tree reach out, heavy laden with fruit, the roots of the tree have to expand deep and wide to compensate. You can't have a tree with a 20-meter branch diameter and a 30-centimeter root system. The weight of the responsibility of the tree upends itself. And so you find that in martial arts, but in life in general, sometimes you're growing branches and sometimes you're growing roots. And the only ones that you'll see very obviously are branches and fruiting. So you might spend 2 years growing roots in martial arts, and you think you're not doing anything. You think it's very slow. Boring's not quite the right term. It's not boring. You often feel defeated. You know, oh, what am I doing? Oh, I'll never amount to anything. I'm not going anywhere. Look at that guy. He's doing all this. I've been training the same amount of time. Why I can't? I do triple backflips, over a table. And all of a sudden, once you've just extended those roots and extended the roots for however long that takes for you, and it's like this constant process here. You don't do that once. Then it starts to shift, and all of a sudden you start growing branches and leaves like there's no tomorrow. Suddenly, in a 12-month period, you triple your position as a martial artist and your depth of understanding and your ability to apply that understanding. And suddenly these branches shoot out. And then that'll peak and slow. And then you'll be growing roots again. And it's a period where you'll enter another section of like, oh, I'm not growing, I'm not moving, everything's moving slow. I must have fallen off the path, as if that was even possible. Then it's at those points, those low points in the roots growing, but the branches aren't moving. Or the winter's come and you've lost all your leaves and you're like, ah. It's in those points where usually your character is tested. And the question is, well, are you willing to find out what comes next? Or have you reached the end of your willingness? And that's really the only question. It's never a question of whether you're talented or not. I've met a bucket load of martial artists, and very few of them have any talent, myself included. The huge number of martial artists who I get the opportunity to meet around the world are still involved in martial arts because they continue to be involved in martial arts, not because they were born talented under the star destiny of the 108 star chronicles. Yeah, it's just that everyone else left and they were the ones that kept studying. Or that when everything got really hard for them and they felt like they weren't moving at all, they had the willingness to find out, well, what happens if I turn up tomorrow? What happens if I still go, well, I'm still going to turn up tomorrow because screw it, whatever. I'm just going to turn up, And it is kind of mixed in with a bit of, you could say it's a sense of like righteous arrogance. You're like, well, screw it, I'm too invested now, I'm just going to keep turning up. But slowly those people find out that eventually the season of winter passes for them and then spring comes. Magic. And all of a sudden they take a jump up. Like, it's unbelievable. Everyone in their peers and their colleagues and their teachers say to them, did you just see that? That's incredible. I've never seen you perform that ever before. You've always faltered at that particular principle. And all of a sudden you haven't just grasped it, you've totally taken it to a whole other level. And it's done now, Like, now you're no longer thinking about the placement of your feet in that setting. Now you're moved on to a new level where you're thinking about your emotional response maybe, or your hands. And that process just happens, So if you find that you're at a position in your experience where you're right up here, it's like it's peaking in summer, that's really great. Just be aware that, the beautiful colour of the leaves and the fruit comes, and then the harvest season comes and the fruit drops. And that don't be surprised when things go really well and slow right down, and really well and slow right down. And note the very specific wording that I just used as well. If you're at an experience that's in the winter of your season, just chill. Can you imagine going out to your garden and getting your fruit tree and being like, damn it, I want pears, and like shaking the tree and going out every day with a flamethrower and trying to like warm the tree up because you're like, I really, really, really want pears. Like, either you're just going to completely destroy the opportunity of the tree, it'll never produce pears, Or if you actually manage to con it into doing that before it's ready, you'll get crappy pears, tiny pears that are super sour, and it's like the fruits of your labour won't be satisfying. We all need to really allow the seasons to play out, in our lives, in our businesses, in our relationships, in our experiences. When winter comes in Melbourne, you don't just be like, well, that's it, burn your house down and hurl yourself off the cliff. Like, you just kind of bed down for a bit. Like if you're driving your car, you bought this amazing car, this beautiful Jaguar. Let's say that you bought a diesel car. You drive off the showroom, it's got a full tank of fuel, and you're driving around and you drive 600 kilometers and then the fuel runs out and you end up at a service station and you get out of the car and you go up to the guy at the service station and you start crying. You're like, I just bought the car and it was so adventurous, but now it's over. It was $100,000 and now it's all gone. I have to go back to walking. It's like, you just understand that the car has cycles, and there's times where you have to kind of just take stock and re-resource for yourself. And this might be one of those times for you. It's certainly one of those times for me. And it's absolutely one of those times for the dojo on a whole. And hopefully that explains my decision making over the last few months and the decisions I'm making moving forward over the next few months, because I'm just letting winter play out. And then when spring comes, we can make some decisions at that point. So if you go back over these videos, what you'll find is that they jump around a lot, but the focus has been on this idea of like your identification. Some of them are about answering questions about the fundamentals of the art and some of the structural basics in the art, how I actually came up with those. What are the mathematics? What were the ideas? What was that theory? How did I get that from physics? And how did that play out? And how does classical physics in martial art meet this quantum theory? Like that's scattered through the videos, but most of the videos talking about philosophy rather than structural design are all around us as an individual. Who do we feel like in martial arts? What are the archetypes that we're associating with in martial arts? What are the traps and the potential potholes that we find in martial arts? What are the potholes what are the traps we set for ourselves? That's a great question, because often we end up down the line, we fall into some massive gaping hole and we blame the world. And then later on we start to realize that actually, maybe I wanted to fall down that hole. Maybe that hole was really useful because it spurred me on in a different direction, in a direction I actually wanted to go. But for whatever reason, I decided that I couldn't just make that decision. I had to be a victim of the circumstance to allow me to make that decision. How many, this is going to be a funny example for you. Those of you who drive, how many times have you been in traffic and you've thought, there's a near miss accident and you've thought, they could have bought me a new car, like I was just 2 seconds away from getting a lovely insurance payout. And you think, it sounds funny, but we do this. Sometimes we throw out problems for ourselves into the immediate future, hoping that we'll fall into our own trap so that we can actually finally stop doing the thing that we don't want to do, or that we can have the excuse to change, the direction that our lives are heading in. And usually that causes a whole bunch of problems for a whole bunch of people, most notably the people that we blame for that. Maybe it'd be interesting if you find that is going on in your life, and there's little aspects of that. Just kind of remind yourself that you have the ability to develop your life entirely off like your value. You don't need to cheat the world. You don't need to convince yourself through misery. You don't need to go out looking for trouble, because trouble will find you regardless of what you attempt to do. And instead, when trouble wanders along, you want to actually review it and then make friends with that and find out that this trouble's coming along because of something you've established. I'll give you an example. We as humans, we have a tendency to create conditions which we use to be the excuse for our behaviour. So let's say, for example, that car snow. So I'm driving along and someone bumps into my car. And I've already created the experience, I've already created the condition that I'm angry about my car, or I'm driving around concerned about cars, because I've already developed a whole rhetoric about, how people shouldn't bump into each other's cars, and cars are very expensive and they're very precious. This is, do these people know what they're doing as drivers? And I've already spent years of my life devoted to developing this kind of internal dialogue every time I sit in traffic. And then someone bumps into my car, and if you really consider what that is, it's just a process. It's just a happening, isn't it? Like, how many things bump into things on a day-to-day basis? I mean, the leaves fall off a tree and fall onto the ground, like an apple falls off the tree and bounces off the ground. Does the ground get up and is like, how dare you sue the apple tree? Or suddenly take such offense to this experience? It's like, yeah, sure, there might be process. Go and you make your insurance claim, whatever, for your car. But if you get out of the car and you're furious and you go, I had a terrible day today because someone drove into my car, you should be more honest with yourself. You say, I've chosen to feel really terrible because I set up a condition that if anyone did anything wrong or made a single mistake, I was going to lose my absolute bananas. And then at least you're being honest with people. And then people will laugh at you, hopefully, and be like, well, what do you want me to do about that? I mean, the next part of the question is really obvious. Do you want to change the narrative so you have a different experience? And if we're being honest, 99% of us would say no, and then go off and, I'm going to be alone now, so I can just continue to stew in the fester of my own self-made misery. And very rarely would we legitimately kind of take a breath and drop our shoulders and be like, oh yeah, actually, you know what? This story, this narrative I've been telling myself and spending a lot of time and money developing, I must add, for the last 20 years, it actually has never done anything for me. I'd love to change that story. That's amazing. That does happen to us all from time to time. The purpose of these talks and this philosophy discussion over the last 13 weeks has been around just identifying some of the ways that we hide in our little shapes. Yeah, and if you're wondering who you're hiding from, there's only one person you can hide from. It's you. Everyone else sees you. One of my favorite quotes from the Prophet talks about clothes and beauty, and someone asks him talks about this, and so Khalil Gibran's fictional character Al-Mustafa, his response says, when you hide yourself, you fool yourself because you hide only your beauty. Your ugliness shines for the world to see. And I think, whoa, that really stabs you in the heart, because that's not the goal, is it? When you're feeling vulnerable or you're feeling like you're a bit of a grump, you're putting on a brave face, you're kind of hoping that you've convinced everyone. But if you think about your immediate friends and family and the circle of people that you know around you, I'm pretty sure that with only a few seconds of thought, you can categorize them into generally what your experience of them is on average. Not necessarily whether one day they're smiling or one day they're grumpy. You could pitch them, if you had a scale of whatever it is you put at the top and whatever it is you put at the bottom, you could easily pitch them very quickly. If you attempt to do the same for yourself, it's a bit harder. You'll blur yourself across homogeneously, and you'll think that you're legitimately represented in all of these, but it's like, well, your friends and the strangers around you, the people who you buy your coffee from, every morning, probably know more about the inner workings of your emotional experience than you will learn ever in your lifetime, because they have no reason to be sold on the story that you're telling yourself. You're just a person, They don't. I mean, they might think that you're kind of cool, but they don't owe you anything. They're not responsible for you. So you come in, and in their mind they're like, oh, Grumpy Bill has come. And you come in and they go, how are you? And you go, oh yeah, no, I'm good. And it's like you present this presentation because you think that you're going to be eliciting certain responses from those around you, but they know. The coffee guy goes, oh great, but in his head he's like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I thought he'd say. This is exactly how I thought Bill would respond, And so if we can work that out sooner, we realize that we can't really hide from the world because everyone already knows, they already can see what's going on. And you think about that. You can see when people are untrustworthy. The only times that you start to convince yourself otherwise are if you have a vested interest in the relationship. That means that if you were to actually acknowledge that this person you don't really trust this person, then it would pose some difficult questions about your choice of friends, you know. So for example, if you're in a relationship with someone, I can relate to this. If you've been in a relationship with someone in the past, and you know, when you started that relationship, you had a sense of like, you know, I certainly wouldn't trust them with my firstborn child kind of idea. But then, you know, 5 years later or 10 years later down the track, well, you're well indebted in this relationship. Things just worked out that way. You've kind of got a vested interest to pretend that this person's changed. Maybe you were wrong. And that's because if you were to genuinely still be like, oh, actually, you know, this is a person, oh, I'm married to this person, I don't really trust them, you know, or no, I mean, I have 12 children to this person, but we don't trust each other. Well, that would bring up some really interesting questions about your motives, wouldn't it? And it's like, well, how did you get there? And why did you allow yourself to tread down that path? So we had this vested interest in contorting our feedback responses. And then, you know, as soon as something changes, they go right back to being the devil in the story. Oh, I always knew. Yes, that 30-year period, sure, it was lovely, we were married for bliss. But, you know, I never trusted you. And I always laugh when people, you know, or if I think that myself, but if I hear people chit-chatting or they're dialoguing with me, you know, some relationships ended and they're just spewing vitriol about this ex-partner. And I think, well, do you really want to continue down that path? Because eventually you're going to have to, the question's going to reverse on yourself and be like, well, why was it that you think so little about yourself and your sense of self-esteem is so pathetic that you would actually continue down the path with someone who didn't love you, or continue down the path of someone that you never trusted? You really have such a low sense of self-esteem that you think that your only relationship you could find would be in the arms of someone you had to convince to be with you? No one in the world wants to be asked that question. That's part of that book, you know, How to Lose Friends and Infuriate People. You never ask those questions. And that's why, you know, people, your friends, you go and you complain to them, they kind of, for the most part, they just nod along with your story. I don't know if you ever noticed that. It's a true friend indeed who sits down and argues with you about your righteousness, you know, and sits down and really, without any agenda of, you know, destroying you, sits down and actually dialogues with your self-professed ideology. And you sit down and they talk over a cup of tea and they go, well, I don't know about that, you know, and you get this feeling like, oh no, I'm in the hands of enemies. Actually, those people, they're probably right up there as your top friends, you know. They're more interested in your existence as a rounded individual than they are in just kind of, and therefore being on the intimate circle of your close friendship group, than they are of being just one of the mass who nod along, one of the yes people, because, you know, you're nice, but they don't really owe you anything. So why are they going to spend the next 20 hours dialoguing with you about your neuroses for the last 30 years, yeah? And it's interesting. It's very different to what we often think. We think that the people who argue with us and the people who oppose us and our ideas are the ones that are out to get us. You know, and we think that the ones who fully agree with us are they're in our inner friendship circle. So you go on Facebook. How many people are putting up posts on your page of things that you blatantly disagree with? Like, you probably go through and cherry pick. We all do, yeah. You cherry pick things. The things that come up on your news feed are just self-fulfilling prophecies. Well, I want to hear more about that. I'm not interested in that. That's a whole idea I don't even agree with, so I'm not interested in anyone who agrees. And so your newsfeed is full of things that reinforce your already established ideology. That's great, if that's what you want. And then as someone decides to have a different opinion, you kind of remove them from the friendship list, you know. It's funny. It's really funny. You know, such volatile relationships we have these days. Like Twitter. My God. We'll go on Twitter and talk to each other as strangers as if they're part of an intimate circle of friends they've had for 30 years. You would never, ever speak to someone on the street as a stranger in the way that you would speak, that someone would speak to them on Twitter or these bizarre social media platforms. Can you imagine you're walking down the street and someone's just walking the other way and talking loudly about something that you happen to have a mild disagreement with? Would you suddenly throw your bag on the ground, pin them against the wall and start berating them, drawing up reference material, pulling in, references, getting people on side on the street to this person, I forget it. Like, that's just not how social dynamics work, So I think we often need to just check. Sometimes we can be fooled. There's another favorite quote of mine. A teacher is always cursed with having such good students. Love that quote. This idea that, and I'm talking about you. No, I won't mention names. this idea that if you eventually you build a position, people they want to really support you. You end up sometimes with people who agree with you more than they disagree. Well, that could be that's lovely, but if that means that things stagnate or you don't develop as an individual anymore, certainly as a martial artist, if you don't develop as a martial artist anymore because you stopped training, you're a teacher now, like a professor, you stopped studying, and then you surround yourself only with students who agree with you, you just that's it. You just kind of stagnate at that point. It's really great when, and I'm sure some of you are laughing at home. I can think of a whole bunch of you guys who have been good, keep me honest for the last 11 years. You feel really compelled to drill in and disagree with me. It's really good. It helps me shore up my idea for next time. I come back and haven't you noticed? I have 6 times the reference material that I did in the previous conversation. I've gone and really confirmed my thoughts around that so that I can continue in this banter, in this dialogue. And it's fun, Some of those relationships have formed some of my closest friendships. And it's lovely, this idea. So thinking about what we were talking about a few weeks ago, I was commenting on Dr. Morris's book, Martial Art Madness, where he presents archetypal identification traps for martial artists. The super god warrior complex, he was just presenting those as funny little cherry-picked things that you could see in martial arts that he had seen very often in his experience of martial arts. And he moved through a whole bunch of different martial art worlds, lots of different styles. And then we were talking a few weeks ago about Jung's work, and we're talking about archetypes and the presentation of human, I won't say coming of age rituals, but like the human maturation process throughout a whole lifetime. I don't just mean like the young adult, I'm maturing on a daily basis. Ask any of my ex-partners. That idea that there's these stories in our cultures, there's these archetypes, these mythical characters who play out these human experiences, and we can kind of look to those stories and we can look to those ideas and those writings, and we can gain insight about ourselves. Because we find it hard to really objectively see ourselves, The candle cannot illuminate itself. Only through the reflection of others can it see itself as a flame. Not my quote. Too eloquent for my quote. That idea really gets to the heart of it's in reflection. It's in our dialogue with others, We'd be fools to eradicate those who disagree with us, because we would be removing half of the reflection, and that half of the reflection probably has immense value. It's certainly towards propelling us into the person we want to be. If maturation of the human being was the process of just only have positive feedback all the time, I think things would be very different and life would be very different, and our entire society would function differently and look differently. But it has been my experience, personally, and I can't talk for any of you, that it is through my unfathomable mistakes, mistakes beyond... It's nice when the audience laugh. Mistakes of such immense proportion, mistakes that I didn't even realize were mistakes, look back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, mistakes that played out into such consequences. It's it's having to take responsibility for those consequences that's really been the seed bed of maturation, and I have found that to be true in my life in general. It's only when I find a way of taking responsibility for the circumstances that I create around me and the narrative and the story that I actually I can watch myself growing as an individual. And so in martial arts, we go through these ways, and when you feel like an invincible, godlike, Buddha immortal, well, you're probably at summer, like go back to that chat at the start of the video. It's probably your summer time. And that's great. Don't wish that away. Just be fully aware that will kind of, the leaves will drop off the tree and you'll descend into your winter experience and just ride it out. This idea that joy and sorrow are like two sides of the scales that the great one, I think Cargill mentions, when you're weighed in the great scales, when your wants and your life experience are weighed in the great scales, needs must your joy and your sorrow rise and fall. And that when you are feeling sorrowful, look into your heart and you will notice that the sorrow is the feeling for the joy that you once felt. It's like it's the counterparty to that. If you didn't have anything of joy, you probably just move along on an equanimous, which would be great, but then you're just kind of entering robot land. I mean, is that really the life experience that you want? And then vice versa, when you're experiencing joy, it's like it's joy that's pouring and filling the emptiness that the sorrow carved out. It's things that fill up and overflow and kind of make right, for want of a better term, the sorrows of our experiences. It's like, wow, that's cool. There's just this process, and so we should just chill. And I listen back to these videos myself, and I go, that's such a good idea. Damn, I'll take that on board. I should totally just chill. So I'll wrap that up with there. My 5-10 minute endpoint, and we'll have a little Q&A. Hopefully you guys have had some questions. A reminder at home for the next little section. It's a Q&A tonight, the second part of this video. So if you're at home, if you're joining us here, you can ask questions, dialogue. If you're at home and you have questions that you want to ask, type them in as comments, and if I can get to them, I will, and happy to Q&A for the rest of this session. We've got about 20 minutes. So I hope that if you are someone who's studying Hoshinden, anywhere from white belt to Nidan, pretty much covers most of it at this stage. I hope that these videos have been useful, more to add layers onto the picture of your ideas of what it is, the position that I teach from, how it is that Hoshinden has developed, the structural design, but also the philosophy of teaching, what it is that the goal really is about. It's about us as individual people becoming wonderful human beings. And I don't know if you'll ever be able to find out whether that's actually happened, because, as the years go on, the group of people who are on my cheerleading squad gets as high as the group of people who are on my enemy squad, Like, the people who love me and adore me are weighed out by the people who hate and despise me. And so, maybe the net effect at the end is 0. I'll let you know at the end of it all. But moving on, Q&A. For those of you, so again, if you've got questions at home, type into the comments. Obviously don't ask me what my favourite ice cream is. Things about what we've been talking about the philosophy, about the teaching style, about the structural design, about Hoshin, about Hoshinden, about my history. I'm happy to answer questions about when I started, or my teachers, or blah, 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 blah. You guys have any particular questions for me first? Anything you've always wondered that you've been like, I have always questioned. Who's Jim? I'm not answering that question. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. Jim's he's part of the audience. What's that, Jim? No. Don't be ridiculous. I do like that we have a penguin mascot who I didn't create, who's been circling around for about 8 years. Came from the Scout Hall, yeah. Yeah. And our good memory. Do you guys have any start entering some dialogue? I have one. Yeah? Was that the question?
If you strangle a Smurf, what colour was it though? No.
I know the answer to that one.
The effect of the moon cycle on energy flow in the body.
Okay.
And And yeah,
Yep.
it's the sensation of how that, what it feels.
What that would feel like.
I know it can affect moods and people's well-being and those sort of things, but on the flow of energy in the body.
So you're talking specifically TCM, like Chinese med idea, organ chi, blood chi, how the cycle of the moon plays out an effect. Does it have an effect?
Yeah.
And if so, how does that play out? Or rather, what the actual effect would you experience that? What would you experience that?
You would experience it, for example, if you're laying in bed, I can get a sensation just from laying there.
Yes. Yeah.
It will just come out of nowhere.
Yeah. A wave up the body. Yeah.
Like the other night as well, like Wednesday night.
Oh, when we had the meditation. Yeah. So, good question. Okay, so...
do you want an easy one?
No, that's a fine one to start with. Okay, so how would I start answering? So answering that question, if we look at cycles, we have to separate that from an emotional experience. So we've got mood changes with moon cycles, as well as physiological studies. So the study of like the effect on moon rhythm and cycle to anatomy and physiology. But talking about from an energetic experience, if you consider the ascending and descending nature of the energy of the body, so you've got like ascending, it's going to sound like ascending chi, descending chi, certain organs that dominate as ascending or descending functions. So you get relationships that are ascending or descending in nature. And I don't actually know, I haven't got a chart in my head of exactly what phases this would apply to, but applying my understanding, I imagine that you could overlap the wave cycle of dominant ascending and descending motion through the body through moon phases over a 28-day period. But I don't know, I could only assume that, and this is just my assumption.
Similar to tides?
Yeah, my assumption would be that at things like full moon, you would have the greatest peak of heightened ascending experience, and that the experiences of new moon would be the greatest, it's ironic, the greatest point of descending experiences. So if you had pathological manifestations, like if you had like, so we say like internal, external, pernicious wind, for example, terms. That's a really good example. Okay, let's talk about kidney chi. We'll go with that. No, liver chi. Oh, that's easy. Okay, liver chi. So if we talk about like liver chi as an ascending, there you go. Yes, that's a good point. So one of the students, Jess, who is a TCM student, has said full moon itself would be the peak of yang, dark moon would be the peak of yin. Yeah, which fits to that idea. And then would you consider, if you can hear me at home, Jess, talk about like would qualities of energy movement, say in organs, so we say like liver ascension, would that be heightened during full moon experiences? Is that what we'd expect? Or is it that full moon would heighten the experience of yang pathologies, So, she says yeah. So I could imagine that like liver yang, so it would be like experiences like liver fire like with the rising Shen idea, the liver, the rising Jing perhaps, would be heightened, so that the experiences of liver ascension would be during a full moon. I imagine would be like more, if you're already prone to liver yang excess, more anger, more like short bursts of sudden sharpness, or if you're more prone to like kidney yin. This is a really good question about like deficiency and excess. If you're prone to kidney yin excess, or even a kidney yang deficiency, perhaps, I assume that dark moon, you would probably experience like a sense of lethargy beyond your normal tiredness. It's really, that's really good. And look, when we're back in class, we should ask Jess the question. my study of TCM's backwards through Shiatsu and my personal study, but I don't hold a traditional Chinese med qualification. So the people in the group who do, and Jess says she'll definitely ask her teachers about this. So that's great. I got like that. Step one. The first question I couldn't even answer it directly myself. You would be moving in the. Yeah.
I just think it's, to me,
it's certainly an ongoing experience to be aware of. Yeah.
Correct. And if the more that you can be more in tune with your body through chi movement,
yeah.
to me, you need to understand what are the effects that cause that.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
I mean, it's certainly helpful. Like if you know that you're okay, you look out and you're like, okay, it's dark moon. I know that I'm someone who's, maybe usually prone to a bit of yang deficiency in these particular ways anyway. Let's say like, kidney yang deficient. Well, it would be a time where you wouldn't push yourself to go and start a new transnational corporation. You might be like, I'd be standing on shaky ground in order to draw what it is that I would need to make that happen. So what's an idea? And answering that is like this concept that says yang is the force that makes things happen. Yin provides the resources to do so. If that helps to round that out. And then so Jess adds again, she says, we're talking about, and again, this is this dialogue between like deficiency and excess, with yin yang deficiency excess. She says if you're yin deficient specifically, you would more likely feel the depletion during yin time, which makes sense. So the evening's the night time. Then she says if there is general yin deficiency symptoms, so it'd be like overall in just maybe even like a shen or a jing as opposed to organ qi, then those symptoms would be more likely to manifest at night time, for example, which makes sense. Now, Jasper has a good question online. He asks, where did the name Reigning Spirit Dojo come from? That's a great question. We should have more of these sessions.
A sunny day.
That's right. It used to be called Desert Physical Dojo, and I just thought it didn't really ring to. So Reigning Spirit Dojo, in martial arts, in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, what you usually do is when you start a school, when you're allowed to start a school, authorized to teach, you take your surname and the lineage name and then add dojo at the end. So you get these things, and you see this all over the place. There's like, if you've got someone called Kelly Ronald, and I don't know, I'm going to keep coming up with names who aren't people I know. Good old Kelly Ronald. And you're starting let's say that Kelly Ronald's a Bujinkan teacher, starts a Bujinkan school. Well then, according to like normal naming systems, he would start a school called, what was his name? Kenny Ronald? Kelly Ronald. He'd start a school called Ronald Bujinkan Dojo. So, yeah, Ronald Bujinkan Dojo. That was a bad example. So for example, from traditional naming systems, this dojo, my dojo, should be called Hawkins Hoshinden Dojo. Like on a traditional level. Or my Bujinkan class, just for the purpose of that, the dojo should change name only for that 1 hour session and be called Hawkins Bujinkan Dojo. That's very classic nomenclature. But not everyone follows those, and so you get names of places of study that are more metaphorical. And so one of the places I studied, I never studied there as a student, I should explain. In Sydney, when I was a student of Hoshin, and I started studying Bujinkan, so before I moved to Melbourne, to the year 2000, to 2005. Because not many people know I only spent 5 years in Sydney studying, which is a very short amount of time given I spent 15 years travelling around studying everything else. Put that on my CV. So in that chunk of time, my teachers, so my Hoshin Jitsu teacher, Jeff Smith, who I might point out would technically have named his dojo Smith Hoshinden Dojo, just putting it out there. But it wasn't. It was called the Tarahumara Dojo, or my favourite, because Tarahumara was the name of the suburb, but Bobbin Head was the name of the particular area. We used to call it the Bobbin Head Dojo, as just a bit of a joke. And one of I wonder if Jeff would remember this. There was a student. Sorry, tangent. There was a student who had in his car. It might have been Brian. He had those little doll with the dog, the head, back like 20 years ago, that would sit on the dash of the car and bounce. So that was the mascot for Bobbin Head Dojo, but there was another. So my teacher had friends, Bujinkan colleagues. There were two women called Frances and Gillian Booth, who I still see in the Bujinkan circle and seminars around. They're Bujinkan teachers. They're probably some of the highest ranked women in the Bujinkan in Australia, at least. They're wonderful women. They have a school in Petersham called Courageous Heart Dojo. And that name always stood out to me because usually what you had was either the dojo was called the surname of the person and the art and dojo, or they named it by the location. So you had like, this would be, if this wasn't going to be Hawkins Hoshin Dojo, it would otherwise be called Hoshin Research Dojo, or Hoshin, I know, it sounds funny, Hoshin Hurstbridge Dojo, So the fact that they named their school Courageous Heart Dojo really, really jumped out at me, and I loved it, and we have seminars there. I used to go along as a student. I wasn't one of their students, but my teachers would run things there. Ed Martin, when I would attend his sessions when he was out every year training, he would usually have a session with Francis and Gillian, and he would host it, they would host it at their dojo. And so I get to go, and it was just lovely. It was always in my mind. Then when I left Sydney, so when I left Sydney, I was 18. I left Sydney basically. I turned 18. I had a dream it was time to leave Sydney and move to Melbourne, literally, and then wasn't going to do that. Had a conversation with Jeff that within one sentence of the conversation, I decided it was time to leave Sydney and move to Melbourne. And so when I was 15, I had started, I'd always run little businesses. So when I was 15, I'd started a computer business, and then I moved out of home when I was 16 and was working, and I'd always run little businesses on the side. And they just had little crappy names, I was 15. It was literally just Dominic Hawkins Computer. It was a very boring name. It wasn't Superman Death Computers. And I think I was applying at my ABN, because ABNs had become a thing then when I was 18, that you had to register. You owned businesses, you had to register for an ABN at that time. Before, and it was just tax file numbers. And one of the processes of that was like, what was I going to name? It was a trading as name, but then I had to register it. And so I left my computer business called something really boring, like Dominic Hawkins Computers, But then I had a business where I was doing a lot of massage. I was teaching like group fitness sessions. And when I left Sydney, I was presenting some martial art experience sessions at workshops and festivals around the country. So I was getting paid to basically, walk people through like the basics of breathing, a bit of qigong. And so I needed to come up with a name, and I have no idea why Reigning Spirit was a name that was in my head, but I was inspired from the Courageous Heart Dojo. I don't know how I jumped from Courageous Heart to Reigning Spirit. Maybe I was driving and there was like a billboard of rain or something, and I was like, I've had this great idea. 10 hours later. So that's possibly how that worked. But then that initial business I called Reigning Spirit, and that was registered in Sydney originally, and then in Victoria, and it was just the kind of loose umbrella business with an ABN that I operated under when I was invoicing. When in 2009, I decided to set up the dojo, so I took part in the NEAS course, the New Enterprise Incentive Scheme, which was awesome. 2009, and it was like Cert 4 and small business management and all these things. One of the primary questions is like, okay, what's the name of the business? And I was like, oh no. And I remember thinking, oh, I could call it, Hawkins Hoshinden Dojo, because that's and my business advisor was like, oh, it's a terrible name for a martial arts school, because he didn't know anything about it. He thought that was really boring. He asked if anything else. I said, well, I've got this other business I run called Reigning Spirit. And his suggestion was, why? Well, to save money, he said, you already own that as a business name. Why don't you just trade as Reigning Spirit Dojo without updating the business name and just use Reigning Spirit? You already pay for that. And I was like, genius. So it became Reigning Spirit Dojo because of that. But then I think about 6 months later, when that name was up for renewal, I extended it to just Reigning Spirit Dojo and then moved it entirely to be only the martial arts school and the things that fall under that. Yeah, hopefully that's a funny, maybe not necessarily the most grand response, but hopefully a fun. That's a very honest answer to that question. Now I'm aware we're getting up to the last end of the time, and we're down to 5% battery. We've made it the whole way. Any other questions you guys have in your mind? Things that you've wondered about? Like, that was a great question. About. I must have been talking too much. No one else has asked. Any other questions that you guys want to comment on? We can fit one more question in. What about something from like back when you something from when you started? Because I mean, Stephen, you started with me 10 years ago. Obviously, maybe a lot of those questions have been answered over the 10-year period. But thinking back, there must be some aspects or decisions I've made or things along the way that you've had questions
No,
about.
it's been going on for a ride. It's like I'm sitting in the caboose hanging on.
If it's a white knuckle flight, for sure.
Carriage.
It's a harsh flight when you're doing 800 kilometers an hour at ground level.
Exactly.
No pressure about it, right? Well, you guys are just completely fulfilled. I've done my job.
Trying to think.
I'm sure I'll have one in like the next 10 years.
I was going to say the next 5 minutes after the video's
Do you think that going forward, with the success of some of the online, appearances of people, do you think there may be a plan to incorporate that as a way of they can't come here in person? Like, I think there was a lot of value in like having a couple of Jeff's discussions, some other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think I've really enjoyed the ability to do that with the internet, to interview. And there's lots of people that I wanted to interview that we just didn't get around to. Obviously, the proper interview with Jeff, which still didn't happen. But we had a great interview with Craig, my Bujinkan teacher. Great interview with Vicky Basleo, my Kundalini yoga friend. I had set up an interview with one of my teachers in Japan, Takahari Nakadai sensei. He'd agreed to join me for an interview. We just haven't got around to that. But, I mean, the year is still young. And we could definitely do it. So I think that even though these sessions will wrap up now, this is the last one for tonight, because next week we start back the actual classes, Wednesday and Friday nights, as I said at the start of the video. And I'll mention that again at the end. There isn't, if I do continue the interviews, there'll be like pre-recorded things that I'll put up on the Facebook page, on the private group, just throughout the week and when they come up. So it's not that they'll be scheduled in, every Friday will be some session, but on an ongoing basis. I take part in a whole bunch of podcasts. There's people who came out of the woodwork who requested that I join them. They wanted me as a special guest for podcasts, and so I've had weekly podcast sessions with them, and it's all philosophy and different types of, kind of like spiritual ideology, really, and dialogue. And that's been really fun. I've been really enjoying the podcast format. I've been loving it, audio, these things. It's sit down, microphones. So it's possible that I might do something like that as well. Just get these audio grabs. And then I had actually considered starting a Hoshinden podcast, through the Apple podcast program, put it up on the public library as something, and then just start filling it with dialogue and rhetoric and stuff like that.
I know a voiceover guy might be able to help you out.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I think the pay is low at this stage. But that was just
the experience would be good.
it'd be good, wouldn't it? Well, it's a great way of gaining more insight from different perspectives. And then Jess asked, "Are we doing classes for reals now?" Yes. So, if you guys missed the start of the video, I had said that tonight this video is the final of the Hoshinden philosophy and theory videos for this section. I might do more at a future stage, but it's the end of the repeating weekly videos for the coronavirus isolation time, because we've been given the go-ahead from the Victorian government to start back classes in some fashion, and that all starts next week. So our first day of classes back for us is Wednesday, the 24th of June, and we have classes moving forward. The classes will be Wednesday and Friday nights. It will be me. I'll be teaching all of the classes, and I will put up the timetable probably tonight. I'll make a graphic of it, put it up in the Facebook group, update the one on the website. Super important that you know that obviously when social distancing we have to maintain. We're not allowed to grab each other and throw each other over tables and benches. So the class is going to go back to 1.5 hour classes, same like normal times. So the adult classes Wednesday and Friday nights will be times 8 o'clock to 9:30, and it'll be fitness. Kind of go back to like old school style. It'll be fitness, ukemi, lots of ukemi, buckets of ukemi, kata, weapons kata, talks, etc. But we will be missing like hands-on taijutsu. So we've got a lot of other study, a lot of other sabaki that we're going to be practicing instead, because we don't just sit here and get fat. It's time to, again, speaking of myself, it's been a long 3 months, putting these pants on today. So I hope that you guys have had a good session. It's the end of the talk for tonight. If you have other questions that come up, suddenly you get off this in 5 minutes and Narayan goes, "Oh, that was the question." Post it up on the Facebook page, on the private group that we're in. You can post a question and I'm happy to answer it. If there's a start of dialogue of that happening. Always happy. The more that you guys are self-motivated towards asking questions, reaching out for things, setting up stuff, I'm very happy to jump on board for the ride. There's only so much that I can do myself as the leader of the reins with it all. So I hope you've had a lovely session and good evening. I hope that the last 13 weeks have been fun. You've learned a lot about me primarily, but also, and you've joined one of those 2 groups that I mentioned before. Just only tell me if you've joined one of them. I don't care about the other one. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have an excellent weekend. Keep an eye on the Facebook page for the timetable update, and we'll go from there. When classes start back next week, it's gi, come in thermals, but wear your gi, belts, the whole kit and caboodle. We kick back on just as normal. We'll just pretend that the 3 months, no. The 3 months were just a pause. Don't come next week in your onesie. Definitely come in your gi and your outfit. We'll be kitted up.
And if you do, it has to be a cow onesie.
That's right. Very specific onesie. Yeah, none of these bird onesies. It's got to be cows. What was I going to say? Oh, if you are someone who borrowed weapons, so a whole bunch of people who I lent weapons to, those weapons I would like you to bring to the classes that you can continue to borrow probably over the rest of this year. I'll touch base again in December. But remember, they are the dojo's property. Means they're my weapons. So you can continue borrowing those, but they are to become the weapons that you have to use in class because of the issues with coronavirus and the reopening. When we do weapons, which we're probably doing in every class, you will need to bring your own weapon that you manage back and forward. So there won't be sharing of weapons until we get some information from the government that whole thing can kind of ease up. They're for brand new students and trials. I'll have some weapons that will be here for them, and I'll have some alcohol wipe to make that all work. But students will be expected to manage your own weapons, training weapons, to and from class. If you are someone who received mats because you were genius enough to jump on board when I was telling you, come and get mats, then those mats are a gift to you, and I want you to keep them. They're yours to own, and they're for you to set up your home dojo, or just continue your home dojo and continue your training at home. So they are a present from me to you. I hope that they help you. Who knows what the future would bring? It's nice to have an opportunity. Who knows if you end up, if those of you who have teaching degrees and you're like, oh no, something's changed, and oh my God, I can set up a dojo in my garage. Look at that. Turns out I've got mats and all these weapons. Who'd have thought? Then I hope that that's useful. Otherwise, you as a personal, your own personal training, you've got some equipment. Good luck. Hopefully I'll see you next week. If you are absolutely not coming back to training, then let me know. And I will touch base then. Have a good week. Bye. Thank you, all of you.